Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Building Our World. On today's episode, I had the pleasure of being joined by Mertcan Uzun, who is the Talent Acquisition and Diversity and Inclusion Specialist at Blinkist in Berlin. Now, I really wanted to get Mert on the show because he's an absolute expert in the diversity and inclusion field, and this is definitely an area that I've made an effort to really try and build my knowledge on this year. Now, when it comes to this conversation, we go through Mert's journey from academia into talent acquisition, some real kind of complex topics and diversity and inclusion initiatives that he has brought in to Blinkist. But also, and probably most profoundly, we talk about the wider problems, not only in companies, but also in society in this inclusion and diversity space. There's still a lot to do, and we go through not so much just the solutions, but also how we should approach these debates, how we should approach these conversations, and how we should all work together to make it a more diverse and inclusive society. So I learned tons from this conversation, especially as someone who's trying to learn this area. And if you are in the same situation as me, then I really encourage you to give it a listen. You'll get heaps of value from it. So without further ado, let's get this episode started. Right to it in regards to what you do at the moment in your role, where you work, and sort of your general responsibilities.
Yeah. So I am currently working at Blinkist. Blinkist is an app, also a website that you can use on the web. And what we do is we take key insights from nonfiction content. This could be a nonfiction book or a podcast, actually. And we take the key insights from those and make it digestible in 15 minutes through audio or text, which is really nice because it's very time consuming. I'm a huge fan of the product. This is actually the first product that I work and I use the product itself. So that's always a good sign. And what I do is I am working at Blinkist for the last 2 years. I was hired mainly as a recruiter, but based on my background, I've also tackled with DE&I related topics. I started the project, I then kicked it off, and then I also have been given a title to basically do this officially. And my main responsibility is to make sure that Blinkist is an inclusive workplace, which leads to a diverse workforce.
Because you came from academia into talent acquisition, which is, I suppose, not the natural progression. But I feel like everyone always seems to fall into recruitment. So, is there anything from your like studies or your work on the academic side of things that led you to, or has maybe made you more equipped and better, especially around like the diversity side of things and equity and things like that?
Yeah, definitely. Because I moved to Berlin from Istanbul, Turkey, to do my research, which was on, I was focusing on the labor market discrimination and try to understand why do we pay less, for example, to some specific minority groups, or why do we invite some minority groups less to interviews compared to the majority ones. So that was kind of my topic. And when I decided to do my PhD, I've realized that the academia was not for me, because it was very hierarchical and it was definitely not the place where you would see a lot of equality. And then I also had to earn money. I had to finance myself. And that's why I ended up working in companies as recruiters. And then I liked the money and then I decided to stay.
Yeah. I was quite similar, actually. I got up to master's level. I did like a postgraduate degree. And I remember I was thinking about doing a PhD, but the people around me who were going to go and do a PhD, like they were just so different. And you're so right. Like the money in it, you just cannot live like properly in that. And it takes ages to get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if it's like hierarchical.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought I could also have a good impact on the startup scene with things, with the knowledge that I gathered. And I thought recruitment could be the next area because I thought that was kind of the door. And I think today we shut down a lot of doors to specific minorities and specific groups. And I thought I could leave that door open for everyone.
So in what way do you feel companies shut down the doors to these minorities in sort of the tech scene?
I think that it's an obvious fact that there is a huge bias. I wouldn't say that companies are shutting these doors consciously, but very unconsciously. Some of them don't even realize, which is also sad. But even if we open the doors, it's very stereotypical. Because I've seen so many companies talking about their diversity of having 50% female just to see that those 50% female are white females, or mentioning their diverse tech teams to just learn that it's very stereotypical, hired only Asian men to their tech teams and being proud of it. So I think the stereotypical thinking is still there. The very conscious thinking is still there too. And sometimes we don't open the doors, but sometimes we open to very specific stereotypical people.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of companies as well, I spoke about this with someone else, like they're so terrified to be accused of, being backward or, not inclusive, racist, homophobic, sexist, whatever, that they will like almost like panic and then do completely the wrong thing that is so counterproductive to any inclusive culture. Like they whack it out on like social media, and then you see a lot of companies get called out on it. Especially last year, I remember during like the George Floyd thing, companies would do like a post, and then like loads of people will comment and go, "Well, in your company there was these racist incidents that didn't get investigated and things like that." So I think it can be such a problem.
Yeah. I think it's also okay if companies do something. I don't like to approach these things with like hatred, like saying, "Oh, you haven't done anything." But I think we could turn these moments into opportunities, and like instead of asking destructive questions, we can ask investigative questions to these companies and saying that, "Hey, look, you posted this when the Black Lives Matter was like in its peak. What are you planning to do moving forward?" Because I find that is more inviting. And at the end of the day, those big companies are usually occupied by white, male, cisgender, powerful people. And we need that group the most because they hold the power. And if they don't share the power, we don't have the power. So we need to also invite them to the discussion in the sense that, hey, look, it's time for you to educate yourself. It's time for you to share your power. It's time for you to include other voices.
I think that goes for like almost like political discussion in general, or just debates in just everyday life. Because you're so right. You need to approach that sort of group of people in a constructive and opening way, because especially now with like social media and the way kind of debate is constructive, it's so like aggressive, and people try and solve these really complex problems in like the comment section of like a post, which is never helpful. I've never seen anything resolved in that way. But that kind of platform and that like medium of communication opens it up to, it makes destructive communication like quite easy to do. And I think that's why you see so much division and almost like just society like split down the middle.
And social media can be a very dangerous place.
I've seen a lot, especially on Twitter. Like it's just
Yeah,
Twitter. Twitter is just. I know it does like good and it raises awareness for like certain things, but oh my god, some of the stuff I see on there is
yeah,
just ridiculous.
yeah.
So when you came into Blinkist or other companies, how did you get people talking, and then how did you get people to realize these unconscious biases that maybe they have, um, and the problems that were there?
Yeah. So I think the hardest part is to kicking this off part of it. Like, how do you make sure that your company starts doing and taking such initiatives? And the very first step that is, to me, the most important is the commitment of the leadership team, and whether they understand that this is actually a topic to them. And I know there are like also so many companies out there whose leadership think that they are perfect, that they don't have any unconscious bias, they don't need to do anything, they don't even need to invest. I was very lucky in my companies because I always like got the buy-in from my leadership. And usually the way that you start the discussion around it is by doing a research on it. That's my honest opinion. Research in the sense that you need to understand what's really happening in the organization. You need to take a very descriptive photo of your company in the sense of who are you consisting of, and then do a more in-depth analysis of how are those people feeling in the organization. And that's what that has been my approach. Usually we would do in the very first time that I start and kick it off, you do an audit um, with quantitative and qualitative approach. And I also gained that kind of knowledge from my academic time. And then you understand where you are at. And then obviously, no surprise, you always see underrepresented or non-underrepresented minority groups being less engaged,
Mm.
be feeling less belonged, feeling less involved in inclusive decision making. And then you start making a business case saying that, hey, look, there's a group out there that is not feeling as included as the majority. And that is your business case to start this thing off.
Mm. So the practical side of putting all this data together, is that done through, obviously you look at like the employees and the representations of the whole kind of company? Is that looking at the diversity of the pipelines? Is it like employee surveys? How do you kind of pull the data together and get the data, I suppose?
So the getting the data, I tried to do a completely separate interview, because in the future you might share this report with specific stakeholders and you don't want to associate anyone or anything with specific business metrics, because that could be also a source of bias. So basically you build and design a survey from scratch, and you share with your employees. You make sure that it's anonymous and highly confidential, and you make sure that it's only accessible by specific people who has the knowledge of specific terms and has a knowledge of some statistical background. And then you do the analysis. And up to date, we have done at Blinkist, it's a yearly thing that we do. And it has been always separated from other surveys, and it's an individual thing in itself.
And what's the main things that you usually find from these surveys and putting this data together?
So there is actually two parts to it. The very first one is very descriptive. So we ask people, how do they identify with themselves? This could go into gender, this could go to race and ethnicity, this goes to the language, sexual identity, and I think we also have some couple of more, but these are the main ones. And this is basically where we say, okay, we're taking a picture of the company and understand how actually diverse we are, in terms of like what is the variety of diversity we have in the organization. Then we have some specific concepts that we through research, also literature, realized very connected to engagement. These are belonging, decision making, voice, fairness, and the perception of diversity. They have a good engagement with the not an engagement but correlation with the topic of engagement, which at the end also has an impact on the business performance outcome. So we then ask our employees questions regarding those specific concepts. And usually what I often find out is that there is a sometimes big, sometimes small, but always a tendency of a difference between the majority group, which in this case often is the white male cisgender group, to the minority in terms of feeling like how belong they feel, how inclusive they feel, how fair the company is. And then after you have this data is completed, you also get a lot of comments, as we also discussed, this time good comments that you can actually work with, and then you take actions moving forward based on the results.
And so, and then do you present this data to like the board, and
you present it to the leadership definitely, but you also at least at Blinkist, we're like, one of our values is default to transparency, so we also share it with the whole organization, so the whole organization would know how are we doing actually. And then obviously if you have perfect results, that everyone is equally happy and satisfied, maybe you would not have a business case, but that's never the case, because today's workplace is still biased, and today's workplace is still hostile to the minorities. And no matter how you think your company is inclusive, that is just an impossible thing, because our society is not equal.
It's but yeah, because I think presenting stuff like that is so important, because if you are in the majority, you know, white male cisgender, you just won't think about things, like things won't even pop into your brain that you didn't even know were a problem. I remember one company saying they had stairs, but they didn't have like wheelchair or like lift access, and they kept preaching about how they were an inclusive culture, but yeah, like inclusive apart from inclusive only to able-bodied people, and even like little things like that you wouldn't even think of.
No.
So once these problems have been fleshed out and you've presented it to the board or the leadership team, and you presented this business case, what then? So you kind of done the problem part of it. You've identified the problem within the company and the depth of the problem. How does the solution side of it come up? Who comes up with these solutions? How is it implemented? And do you get like much pushback on this stuff as well?
So the way that we try to approach at Blinkist is, the first thing is we divide the solutions into two parts. One of them are quick wins, like fast response, and then the other ones are like more systematic things and long-term effects. Because after such an exhausting survey, people would like to see some answers. People like to see some actions being taken, which are the quick wins. So we try to understand, okay, what can we do in the short term, in 1 week to 1 month, 2 months, that we could change small things that would make impact in people's life. And then we also identify what are the things that we need to change as like a system, as like a procedure or a structure in the organization that would help us become more fair. This takes longer. This takes obviously needs more resources, and this is not going to be visible in the organization, and people might feel frustrated. So we try to do and tackle these two, and of course there's some resistance. As this was, I think, a little bit more in the beginning of our like D&I journey, I would say. especially I was getting sometimes, strange comments from, again, white male cisgender people saying that, why do we need to do this? Which I also understand. Life has been perfect, uh, especially for them. And things are moving perfect, and they don't experience anything bad. So for them, this is so unnecessary because, and I also understand because they have never faced with a challenge. To them, it's not imaginable because you can't imagine things that you have not fully
Mm.
experienced. So a lot of part was also like explaining them, hey, we're doing this because of this and that. We're
Yeah.
doing this because we need to do this. Because
Mm.
there are like people in the organization who are from different communities and who has experienced this and that. But now after like 2 years of my journey at Blinkist, I don't see that many of questions rising because I think people are also on board with the idea that, oh, okay, we're committed. People are more
Mm.
educated, so people don't question it that much.
Yeah. Well, I think when you get that pushback, that is such a critical point because that is where the whole debate and the whole problem solving could literally just blow up
Yeah,
because you need to, as with anything, diversity and equity, especially if someone holds more power, it usually means that they're going to have to be more understanding and maybe give up some of the privileges they
yeah,
had. Of course, they're not going to like fully because of just who they are and how society is like in general. But I think explaining the why the solutions are necessary
yeah.
um, for the people within the business. But what about from like, do you ever have to frame it in terms of like a business case? So if you essentially say these employees at the moment they don't feel so included, or parts of our marketing or parts of our customer base, we're
Mm.
not being able to include them because of this, this, and this. Do you ever have to frame it in terms of, essentially, if we do these diversity initiatives, the business will make more money and be able to
Mm.
grow? Is that ever
Yeah.
a case you have to put together?
Mm, I think so. I'm not fully sure whether I understand your question like perfectly, but maybe I can talk and then you can tell me whether I'm actually answering
Yeah,
your question or
yeah,
not.
let's do that.
Um, I think we definitely had various discussions on why specific groups are not feeling as included as the others, and then how we can solve it. Because we are, I think Blinkist has people in the center, in the very center, and for us, it's very crucial that everyone um, has a sense of belonging. Like a sense of belonging has been, especially since this year, like one of the highest topics that we were like tackling with. When it comes to the business, I think Blinkist also has a lot of. I would like to call our employees like small activists. It's a very socially conscious company, and people are very vocal about it. I think there's no like fear of not talking and etc. Um, so we had a lot of also with the Black Lives Matter, but also with the climate change. Like this when the protests start happening. With all these things, our employees were also like start asking like, what are we doing? How are we making sure that our leadership is diverse? But also, what are we doing to make our marketing diverse? What are the things that we're doing in product that leads to a diversity? And last end of last year and also this year, we moved focusing only on the organization, but then also ran workshops and defined desired states for marketing and the product in order to say, okay, where do we want to be after 6 months in order to increase diversity in also our user base? And we set some OKRs on that. So we also had experienced a transition from only focusing on the the organizational aspects to also having an influence on marketing and product, which are the most important two functions at Blinkist. And now we're in discussions. We're also a content company, like content is huge for us. And now we're also in discussions with our VP of content, Rachel, in understanding, okay, how can we make maybe an audit of our content to understand how diverse our content, how diverse our narrators are, how diverse, our selections and creations. So obviously we're having an impact on the business side.
I mean, there must be such a direct correlation of if you don't have these initiatives and diversity within a company, then your user base will not be
No.
diverse either, and that is bad for business, and you're losing a percentage
Yeah.
of potential consumers.
Huge potential.
Yeah. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is good for business.
I mean, I'm also against saying that we need to have a business case, because I don't know whether I can swear in this podcast, but like it's
You
my
can.
fucking life, I mean, seriously, I don't have to prove something for you to do as an organization to value myself. Sometimes I always feel like people ask me, why do we need more women in tech? And I always tell them, why the fuck not? Why do I have to now present you a case to show you that women can do tech? Like, I find it so silly. Like, we come to the point where we need to prove that we need to scientifically tell them, oh, diversity produces more productive. Like, I should not be doing that.
But rightly or wrongly, do you think in some companies that still needs to happen to affect any change? Are
Yeah.
we past that point now?
No, we haven't. I think that still needs to happen, which also annoys me a lot.
Yeah.
Because we're not living in communities where you can't access to knowledge. We are like living in places where you can easily access to knowledge and have I don't know. Like, to me, it's sometimes very sad to see, because I do have some friends who are doing the same job in some other companies, and I know stories from them that they have to prove things. They have to bring data to showcase that, yes, we need to build employee resource groups, and I'm like, what? No, you don't need to prove anything to be able to do that. It's like it should be a given thing.
Yeah. You do it because it's right.
Yeah,
because it's the right thing to
and
do.
it's also like deserved. Like, minorities also deserve to be treated same as the majority.
So I completely agree with everything you just said. I'm just always trying to think of it in terms of how can, because especially in big organizations, old organizations, like for all these, a lot of this stuff, these initiatives take place, unfortunately you would, to be able to convince people, make a business case. So that's sort of like the angle I'm going with. But Berlin tech in general, from what I can see, it seems more progressive than most other places. Berlin as a place
Yeah.
has always been really progressive. But what are your thoughts on the progressiveness of Berlin and Berlin tech in general? And how far are they ahead of other places, or do you think there's still a long way to go and there's actually a lot of big issues that still need to be solved?
I think there's like so many things needs to be solved. One thing that I don't think Berlin is like leading. Definitely not.
Okay.
I think that's no, definitely not, because I think I would say, although we hear a lot of problems, but I think the tech scene in the US, in my opinion, might be a little bit more advanced.
Oh, really?
And the reason is that not because they are doing it better, but because as the problems are so big, they have, in some at least states, not all, like laws and regulations that are monitoring things. And in Germany, in Berlin, we don't have that yet. We don't have You need to have at least 50% women in specific. We need more involvement of the political actors. And the reason that Berlin is doing good, in my opinion, is because Berlin population is very left. So, I mean, still today, if there's an election, the left would form the Senate, and there's a big
Hmm.
pressure from coming from the people, from the employees, valuing these kind of topics. But I think what we're lacking is rules and regulations, and like kind of written documents that protect minorities in the employment scene. So in terms of awareness, I think US is one of the most aware, because the thing that they're experiencing is like still very intense. Um,
Yeah.
but I think there's still more to do in the German European tech scene.
Interesting.
That is my thought.
Interesting. Because I've always seen, yeah, I've always seen Berlin as being super advanced. But then there's a difference between Berlin and Germany as a whole. Like, because I suppose you need those German
Yeah, it's a huge
regulations.
difference.
Because Berlin
Yeah,
is quite unique, very unique
yeah,
in the German
yeah.
context.
That is true. Yeah, that is
Super
true.
interesting. Well, we'll wrap up soon. But it's been so interesting because you can even see from like having these discussions is so useful because you can even see from our conversation, like I see a topic or a problem, and then with my biases and my background, I view it in a certain way. Because of
Yeah,
your background, you view it in another way, and then we come
yeah,
together and we be able to people's explain our viewpoints and why we think a certain way. And well, it's mostly you educating me, to be honest. But it's I think if that happens, like within companies in a balanced way and in a really constructive way, I can see how these initiatives at Blinkist and other companies
yeah,
can really do a lot of good and really take off.
yeah, yeah, definitely. But also, if there's someone listening to this podcast, and if they are thinking that they have a specific power in one way or another, and especially if they're like white, male, cisgender, it's their responsibility to learn things. Not
Mm,
people should not always wait things from their companies. It's we also have an individual responsibility to educate ourselves, especially if we're in powerful positions, because the work of educating the powerful ones always has been accepted, or expected by the minorities, and this is an unpaid, exhausting labor. So, what I would advise to those who are listening, it's your responsibility to educate yourself.
mm. And what do you think is the best way to educate yourself on this topic?
Google, Google racism, and it's as simple as it is. Google homophobia.
Yeah.
Google things out. There's like it's that is also another question that annoys me a lot. Like we are living in an era where information has never been as easily accessible as
Mm,
today. And sometimes, oh, where should I start? There's so many content that I don't know where to start, and then people don't start, and then people are like, you know what? It's so exhausting. Just Google, keywords. There are
mm,
like so many easy things that you can find. Buy a book on Amazon for €10, or just type LGBT rights, or just write LGBT and then click on the news section on Google, and you will be presented by all the things that are happening and all the things that these people are experiencing today. Or
mm.
type down racism in Germany or racism in Berlin. Go to the news section and you will be presented by news.
Well, even as I asked you that question, what should I do to educate myself? Like, it shouldn't be up to you to tell me how to, even
Yeah,
how to get better at a topic. And I think um, it's such a a difficult one because I'll use again the Black Lives Matter thing last year as like an example. Like it shouldn't be up to in this case black people to educate white people on race, but then coming from, as I said, like a white person's point of view, you don't want to do it wrong. And you want to do it in the right way. So sometimes, obviously, you end up asking, but it shouldn't be that responsibility.
And asking is perfect, but also doing things wrong are also perfect. We're like living in a place. It's so dangerous now, and people are like scared. People are like, I don't want to say this. I don't. And then we shut down and we don't talk. I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think we need to put pride aside and be also able to say, hey, look, I said that. I then learned out that it was very wrong. I am super sorry. I'm going to try never doing it again. But I think we should learn also how to be vulnerable. Like learning D&I doesn't always about learning about race or LGBT or disability issues. It's more than that. It's also learning how to be vulnerable. It's learning how to be open-minded. It's learning how to be good with other people. It's also about like enlarging your community. It's about enlarging your perspectives. It's not only about these descriptors, but it's more than that.
Companies, they're almost like a microcosm of how we should behave in society, being open, being honest, being vulnerable, asking questions, preparing to be wrong. If we do that in companies, it makes for a great, inclusive, thriving company. If we do that in society, it does exactly the same thing. So almost like a lot of our discussion could be, we could replace the word company with society and talk about a whole host of issues. So it's super, super interesting.
Yeah.
So one last question. In sort of 5-10 years' time, we could use Berlin Tech as an example, or just society in general. How far, I mean, the problem is never solved, but how far along, how far more advanced do you think we'll be in these sorts of areas in terms of diversity and all that sort of stuff?
I have no idea. I literally have no idea, because it can change. Like it could be 2 years. If we continue doing the way that we do it, it could be 10, it could be 20. It also has it depends on so many other things. Tomorrow we can wake up and the Berlin Senate say, hey, look, we have new rules in the employment scene, and from now on you have to do this. Could change a lot. If the Senate doesn't care about it, we have to wait. Like so many things, but we shouldn't approach it in a way like, when are we going to be finished, or when are we going to be done, or when is it going to get better? How many years, hours, days left? We should just, it might never end, and it's probably going to never end, because the very basics of our society has been built on the powerful and the powerless. So all these two binary dimensions, and breaking that, it's very hard, and it might not happen. So we should always try to do better without having any expectations.
Thank you so much for listening to the Building Our World podcast. I really hope you got some great value from it and enjoyed the conversation. If you are new to the series, then I do encourage you to take a look at the back catalogue. I've got some conversations with some of the brightest and best in Berlin Tech. And if you want to stay up to date with future episodes, then please do hit that subscribe button and that follow button. It really helps me try and gain some traction with this series. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. And until next time, goodbye.